Welcome to the Friday Night Campfire Stories. My name is Rob and I will be your host for this evening. If you're new here, every single Friday we experience one chapter from one of my original stories. This week we will be getting into Chapter 3 of my story, Astral. If you haven't checked out Chapters 1 and 2, I would suggest doing that before we get into Chapter 3. But if you have checked out Chapter 1 and 2, here's a quick little summary of what's happened so far. Astral has followed Callum, a young man in his 20s living in Nashville, Tennessee, who's had this reoccurring dream every single night since he was a little kid. And the dream is just him staring at himself for the entire night. But that all changes one night when he is able to move in this dream. And that opens up a whole new realm that we are just now getting into and getting ready to experience. Tonight we will be diving a little bit deeper into what is this new world, what is this society, what is Callum truly capable of. We are into Chapter 3, so this is usually the part where we're already halfway through the story. However, Astral, as I stated earlier on in the series, is an 8-part series, not our normal 4-part series. So we're only a quarter of the way done. We still have so much more left to experience. So don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and please enjoy Chapter 3 of my story, Astral.
The soft hum of fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as Callum sat at his desk, staring blankly at the manuscript in front of him. He blinked at the page. A paragraph of carefully edited prose stared back, defiant and unapologetic. He was supposed to be proofreading, meticulously combing through every line, yet the words blurred together like a foreign language he didn't recognize. For the first time in his life, work felt entirely insignificant. The events of last night played on repeat in his head, each moment more unbelievable than the last. The flying, the young man, the society. He had seen impossible things, and yet the strangest part was how real it all felt. More real than the mundane tasks now waiting for his attention. He turned slightly to glance out the large office window. Nashville's skyline stretched far into the horizon, a pale blue haze of spring sunlight softening the city's edges. From here, Callum could almost make out the faint silhouette of the Batman building. The memory of dangling off the edge of its roof sent a shiver up his spine. Did that really happen? "Callum, you got a minute?" The voice jolted him back to reality. He spun in his chair to see his boss, Mr. Stevens, standing at the edge of his cubicle. Mr. Stevens was in his early 50s, with a receding hairline and a perpetual frown that suggested he hadn't smiled since 1998. Yeah, sure," Callum stammered, forcing himself upright. Stevens stepped closer, squinting at him as if sizing him up. "You okay? You look distracted." Callum opened his mouth to respond but caught himself. What could he say? "I astral projected out of my body last night, tackled a purse thief in my dream state, then flew up a skyscraper to meet a stranger who says I'm doing advanced level dream magic." "Just a late night," he said instead, offering a half smile. Stevens grunted, clearly unimpressed with the answer. "Well, don't let it interfere with your work. You've got a manuscript backlog. Get moving on the Peterson edits before noon." "Yes, sir." As Stevens walked away, Callum let his shoulders slump and sighed deeply. "Focus," he told himself. "Just get through the day." But it was a lie. He knew he wouldn't be able to focus, not with 9:30 looming like a promise on the horizon. The hours dragged by like molasses. Callum bounced between pretending to work and checking the clock every 5 minutes. At one point, he dropped his pen and spent a solid 10 minutes staring at it on the floor, mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. What's astral projection? What society was that guy talking about? And how did I manage to fly? The thought both terrified and thrilled him. Callum had spent years dreading his nightly dreams, trapped in the familiar silence of his room. But now there was a world beyond his imagination waiting for him. A world where he could fly, run, act without consequence. And possibly, he wasn't alone. For the first time, Callum felt awake. Earth to Callum. The voice belonged to Carrie, his co-worker in the cubicle next to his. She peeked over the divider, a bemused expression on her face. Her brown curls framed her face, and she arched an eyebrow as she watched him. "You've been staring at your desk like it insulted your mother," she teased. "You good?" Callum blinked, shaking himself out of his stupor. "Yeah, fine, just tired." Carrie smirked. "Uh-huh. You look like you're plotting your escape. Big plans tonight or something?" He hesitated, a strange energy bubbling in his chest. "You could say that." "Well, try not to let Stevens catch you daydreaming. He's on the warpath." "Noted." Carrie ducked back down and Callum ran a hand through his hair, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Just a few more hours. By lunch, Callum had given up entirely on productivity. He sat alone at a corner table in the break room, poking half-heartedly at a sad sandwich he'd packed that morning. Around him, co-workers chatted about their weekends, their families, their meaningless lives that suddenly felt so small compared to what he'd glimpsed. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his thoughts. A text notification flashed on the screen. It was from an unknown number. "Meet me tonight. Don't be late." Callum's stomach flipped. He didn't need to guess who it was. The young man. His hands shook slightly as he slid the phone back into his pocket. It wasn't just his imagination. This was real. The young man knew he'd show up. The rest of the day was a blur. Pages went unread. Emails were left unanswered. Stevens gave him another disapproving look before leaving for the day, but Callum barely noticed. His mind was on the rooftop, on the secrets waiting for him at 9:30. By 5:01, he was out the door, walking fast enough to earn strange looks from pedestrians. The city bustled with its usual energy, but Callum barely saw it. He needed food, a shower, and time to prepare, because tonight, everything was going to change. Callum rushed home, his messenger bag slung over his shoulder and his mind racing with anticipation. The energy that had carried him through the day turned frantic as the hours felt both fleeting and endless. Just get to tonight, he told himself. When he pushed open the door to his apartment, he barely noticed the quiet hum of the city filtering through the window. Dropping his bag near the couch, he quickly went through his evening routine like a man on autopilot. Dinner was a joke. He stood in his kitchen, staring blankly into the fridge before settling on a leftover sandwich and a handful of chips. He ate standing up, not tasting a thing, glancing at the clock every other minute. Each time, disappointment hit him like a punch. 6:02 p.m., 6:14 p.m., 6:27 p.m. Finally, after cleaning up his uneaten dinner and pacing around the apartment a few dozen times, Callum flopped onto his bed with a sigh. His eyes flicked to the glowing red numbers on the digital clock. 6:30 p.m. "Seriously?" he muttered, throwing his arm over his face in exasperation. The sun was still glaring through the thin curtains, bathing the room in a soft golden glow. Birds chirped outside. People laughed somewhere on the street below. Callum groaned and rolled onto his side, pulling the blanket over his head, as if that might make it dark enough to sleep. It didn't. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing himself to drift off. "Come on, just fall asleep," he whispered, half begging himself. Nothing happened. The harder he tried, the more awake he felt. His body shifted restlessly, his mind refusing to quiet. He thought about the night before, about flying, about that young man with the knowing eyes and cryptic words, the society, astral projection. He didn't even know what that meant, but the weight of it felt monumental, as if it were some hidden truth about the world that had always been just out of reach. Callum tossed the blanket off in frustration and sat up. This is pointless. The clock read 6:58 p.m. The sun wasn't even close to setting, and there was no chance he'd be able to sleep while daylight poured through the window. With nothing else to do, Callum tried to kill time. He switched on the TV and flipped through channels without paying attention to any of them. News anchors droned about local events, sitcom characters laughed on cue, and cooking shows showcased impossible recipes Callum would never try. After a while, he turned the TV off entirely. It was only making him more anxious. By 7:20, he found himself pacing his apartment again. He picked up a book he'd been meaning to read for months, sat down on the couch, and stared at the first page for 5 minutes before tossing it onto the coffee table. The words didn't stick. He checked his phone. No texts, no calls. The clock mocked him again. 7:41 p.m. Unreal, Callum mumbled, rubbing a hand over his face. As the minutes crawled by, Callum's restlessness turned desperate. He needed to sleep. If he didn't fall asleep soon, he'd miss his chance. What if his body betrayed him and stayed awake until morning? The thought alone was unbearable. At 8 o'clock on the dot, Callum grabbed the bottle of melatonin he'd bought the night before and popped the cap off with shaky fingers. He poured a capsule into his palm, hesitated, then grabbed one more for good measure. He turned off the lights, brushed his teeth for a second time just to give himself something to do, and climbed back into bed. The room was dimmer now, the sunlight fading to a pale amber glow. Still, it wasn't completely dark, and Callum could see the faint shadows of his furniture against the walls. He stared at the clock one last time. 8:07 p.m. Callum lay perfectly still, breathing deeply, counting backward from 100 in his head like he'd read about online. The minutes felt like hours as his mind flitted from thought to thought, refusing to settle. What will he tell me? What if I can't get there? What if this is all just some weird, stress-induced hallucination? With each passing thought, the weight of the melatonin began to pull at him. His limbs felt heavier. The clock, now 8:34 p.m., grew fuzzier in the corner of his vision as his eyelids began to droop. Finally, Callum's breathing slowed. His body relaxed. The buzz of the city outside faded to a distant hum. The world went dark, and the chair appeared. The silvery glow welcomed Callum as he opened his eyes. The wooden chair beneath him felt familiar, as did the hum of stillness that filled the room. But tonight, he didn't waste a second. He stood, the anticipation bubbling inside him like a spark ready to ignite. Every nerve in his body seemed alive with energy as he made his way to the door and stepped into the hallway. The world outside his apartment felt eerily quiet, too quiet for a city like Nashville, but Callum didn't care. His focus was singular. He had to get to the AT&T building. The young man would be waiting, and Callum had to know more. The moment his feet hit the sidewalk, he broke into a brisk pace. The city stretched out ahead of him in all its late-night quiet. Streetlights glowed faintly above, their pools of light creating soft halos on the pavement. Everything looked normal, at least as normal as a dream could be. The only sound was his shoes tapping against the concrete, steady and rhythmic, but his mind was anything but calm. What is this society? How did I fly? And what else am I capable of? The questions looped endlessly, pushing him forward as if they had their own momentum. He turned a corner and picked up his pace. The AT&T building was only a few blocks away now, its dark spires looming in the distance. For the first time in years, Callum felt awake, truly awake, and the thought of what awaited him had his heart pounding. Lost in his thoughts, Callum barely noticed the deep rumble approaching from the side. The deafening blare of a semi driving full speed ripped through the air, yanking Callum back to reality, just as a pair of headlights burst into view. A semi-truck roared toward him, its massive grille barreling down the street, mere feet away. Callum froze, his breath catching in his throat. There was no time to move, no time to think. And then his body melted. The world slowed as Callum's limbs softened like liquid wax. His vision blurred as he dropped to the ground, a shapeless, rippling pool of himself, slick and transparent as water. The truck roared over him, its tires skimming harmlessly across his formless body before it continued down the street, the sound of its engine fading into the distance. Callum's mind spun in disbelief. What just happened? He felt himself reforming, his legs solidifying, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. Callum stared at his hands, now completely normal, as though nothing had happened. What the hell? He whispered to himself, his voice trembling. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. He spun around, looking for any witnesses, someone who might explain how he'd survived. But even if there were, they wouldn't be able to see him. He ran a hand through his hair, stumbling a step backward before catching himself. Okay, he muttered, trying to calm the trembling in his hands. Whatever had just happened defied reason. Callum didn't understand how or why he'd turned into liquid, but there was no time to figure it out now. His focus returned to the building. Get it together, he muttered. Keep moving. He forced himself forward, his steps heavier now, as if the weight of what had just happened were dragging behind him. The AT&T building loomed closer with every block, its spires cutting sharply into the night sky. Finally, Callum stopped at the base of the building, craning his neck upward. He squinted into the darkness, barely able to make out a figure leaning over the rooftop edge. "Callum!" The young man's voice rang out, clear and sharp. "Took you long enough? What are you waiting for? Get up here!" Callum blinked up at him, still shaken from what had just happened. He took a deep breath, the memory of flying last night flashing through his mind. The thought of it sent a rush of excitement through his veins. "You've done this before," the young man called down again, his voice teasing. "Don't overthink it. Just go." Callum clenched his fists, steadying himself. This time, he wasn't going to panic. "All right," he muttered, grinning despite himself. "Let's see if I can really do this." He bent his knees, feeling the energy build in his legs, and then pushed. The ground fell away beneath him in an instant. Callum soared upward, faster and smoother than before. The cool night air rushed past his face, and his heart pounded, not in fear, but in exhilaration. He passed window after window, the building's sleek surface blurring as he climbed higher and higher. The rooftop edge came into view, closer and closer, until he landed. This time his feet hit the ledge with confidence. He stumbled only slightly, grinning wide as he steadied himself. "I did it," he whispered, the disbelief in his voice giving way to triumph. "Well, look who figured it out." Callum looked up to see the young man standing a few feet away, his arms crossed and a smug grin on his face. The moonlight illuminated his features, messy blonde hair, sharp blue eyes, and that same cocky confidence Callum remembered from the night before. "You're a natural," the young man said, giving him an approving nod. "Told you it'd be easier this time." Callum couldn't help but laugh, still catching his breath. "Yeah, I guess I just had to believe I could do it." "Belief's half the battle," the young man replied, his grin widening. "But flying, that's just the beginning." Callum's smile faded slightly as he caught the weight behind those words. He stepped forward, his curiosity bubbling to the surface. "What do you mean? What is all of this? Who are you?" The young man turned to face the skyline, his expression suddenly more serious. He didn't answer right away, letting the silence stretch between them. Finally, he spoke. "Where would you like me start?" Callum followed his gaze, his heart pounding all over again. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of what he didn't know. He was ready for answers on his new life. Callum stared at the young man, his breath finally slowing after the exhilarating flight. The night air felt cooler up here, sharper against his skin. Nashville sprawled out around them, the city lights twinkling like 1,000 stars. It felt so surreal, yet grounded, like this rooftop was the only thing tethering him to reality. The young man, the guy who saved me last night, Callum thought, turned to face him fully, his sharp blue eyes gleaming with intrigue. "So," Callum said, breaking the silence, "are you finally going to explain what's going on? Who are you?" The young man smiled faintly and extended a hand. "Reese." "Callum," he replied, shaking it firmly. "I know." Reese's smirk widened, and Callum blinked, thrown off balance by the comment. "What do you mean, you know?" "You're hard to miss, man," Reese said with a shrug, leaning back against a rooftop ventilation unit. "When someone new pops up like you did, word travels fast, especially when that someone doesn't play by the rules." Callum frowned. "What rules?" Reese cocked an eyebrow. "We'll get there. Let's start with the basics. Do you even know what you're doing? Do you understand what's happening when you come here?" Callum shoved his hands into his pockets. "Not really. I've been dreaming like this for years, watching myself sleep. But lately, it's different. I can move. I can leave my apartment. I flew here. But it doesn't make any sense." Reese studied him for a long moment, as though deciding whether or not to believe him. Finally, he sighed and ran a hand through his messy blonde hair. "All right, here's the deal," Reese said, pushing off the vent and beginning to pace. "You're astral projecting. Your consciousness, your soul, if you want to get all spiritual about it, leaves your physical body when you sleep. Most people can't do it, and the ones who can, they don't even realize it's happening. It just feels like a dream, like they're floating above themselves, watching." Callum's brow furrowed. "That's what I've been doing, for years." "Exactly." Reese pointed at him, emphasizing the word. "Most people stop there. Even if they do it night after night, they never leave the safety of their bedroom. They don't know how, or they can't break that tether. It's rare for someone to roam beyond their own house, let alone the entire city." Callum tilted his head, trying to process what he was hearing. "So, you're saying there are other people who can do this?" "Oh, tons," Reese said with a nonchalant wave of his hand. "But like I said, most never leave their room. The few who can, the ones who can explore the world like this, we're part of something bigger." "What do you mean?" Reese stopped pacing and turned to him, his expression more serious now. "We call ourselves the Society. We're a group of astral projectors who've learned to use this ability to help people, to help the world however we can." Callum blinked. "Help the world? Like superheroes or something?" Reese barked out a laugh. "Not exactly. We're not out here wearing capes or fighting supervillains. But think about it, Callum. When you're astral projecting, you can go anywhere. You can see anything. There are no doors you can't open, no walls you can't walk through." He paused, letting the words sink in. "We use that ability to do good, however we can, find lost people, stop crimes before they happen, deliver messages to those who need to hear them, stuff like that." Callum's head spun with the possibilities. His mind raced back to the night before, tackling the purse thief and handing the woman back her bag. At the time, he thought it was just a dream. But now, it was real. He did stop a crime. "That's incredible," Callum murmured. "But why me? I don't understand why this is happening to me all of a sudden." Reese squinted at him like he was trying to see through him. "Yeah, that's the part I don't get." "What do you mean?" "I mean you're messing with me." Reese pointed at him again, accusingly. "You have to be. No one learns to do what you're doing without help. Hell, it took me years to get good at this. And you're already flying?" Callum frowned. "I didn't exactly learn it, it just happened." "That's what's messing me up," Reese exclaimed, throwing his arms in the air. "You're skipping steps. Most people take months just to move a few feet beyond their bed. Years before they're doing anything crazy. Me? I didn't even leave my house for a year, and I sure as hell didn't fly until 2 years later." He crossed his arms, looking Callum up and down like he was some kind of science experiment. "But you? You're just figuring it out like it's no big deal. You don't even know what astral projection is, and you're already flying up skyscrapers? It doesn't make any sense." Callum shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I don't know what to tell you. I'm just doing what feels natural, I guess." "That's the crazy part," Reese muttered, shaking his head. "For most of us, this takes practice, years of training to get it right. But you're picking it up like you were born to do it." Callum stared at him, his mind still reeling. "So what does that mean? Am I different?" Reese shrugged. "Don't know yet. But trust me, you've got talent, raw talent. I don't say that lightly." Callum felt a strange mix of pride and unease at Reese's words. He wasn't used to being good at something right away, especially not something as bizarre as this. "So, what now?" Callum asked cautiously. Reese's grin returned, sharp and confident. "Now? I start showing you the ropes. If you're going to be out here flying around like a pro, you might as well learn how to do it properly. The society's got rules, and if you're going to be one of us, you'll need to understand them." "The society," Callum repeated, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. "And they'll just let me join?" Reese chuckled. "That depends on you. But from what I've seen so far, I don't think you'll have any trouble fitting in." Callum turned to look out over the skyline, the city stretching far into the horizon. The air was cool against his face, and the lights below seemed to pulse with a rhythm he'd never noticed before. A strange sense of purpose began to settle over him, like a piece of his life had finally clicked into place. Whatever this was, whatever he was, Callum knew one thing for sure. His life would never be the same.
That is going to do it for today. I hope that you guys did enjoy. If you did, be sure to click that like button, hit that subscribe button, and be sure to come back next week because we are just now getting into the thick of the story. Come back next week as we are going to experience what the society truly is. We get to see everything that it has to offer, everything that it's about, and all of the members of the society. So I would definitely say you do not want to miss next week's episode. Also, if you cannot wait any longer, you need to know more about the story, you can purchase my book, A Perfect Journey Through Villainous Eyes, available on Amazon right now. That includes Astral, along with 5 other chilling stories that I think you guys would truly enjoy. You can purchase that in the link in the description below. But that's all I have for you guys today. Hope you guys did enjoy. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and as always, thank you for spending a little bit of your evening here with me.